The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jay Ferris. I'm with Nebraska Farm Bureau. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar to get some information on how to go about protesting your property valuations. Before we begin the webinar this evening, just have a couple of housekeeping tips. During the presentation this evening, if anybody has a question, we certainly encourage those questions. There's one of two ways to get your questions asked this evening, and one is there's a little icon that looks like a hand. If you click on that, that is essentially raising your hand. I will see that. I can unmute your microphone. If you have a microphone on your computer, you can ask that question. If you choose not to do it that way, or if you don't have a microphone, you can simply type a question into the question box that's in your control panel of your GoToWebinar screen, and you can ask that question. I will see that, and then I can interrupt the presenter and ask your question, and everyone will get to hear it that way as well too. So with that, we have Catherine Lang and Jay Rempe with us this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Jay Rempe, who is Vice President of Governmental Relations for Farm Bureau. So Jay.
Thank you, Jay, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're very pleased that you could be on here tonight with us. This kind of came about at last minute after the valuation notices went out June 1st. We received a lot of interest, or a lot of phone calls and emails about the valuation increases that have occurred for a lot of people across the state, and a lot of questions about how to go about protesting valuations. So we had the idea of, well, let's try to pull together a webinar real quick and try to provide some information on that. So we're glad that you joined us tonight. We're very pleased that tonight to have Kathy Lang with us to help us out and talk a little bit on this topic. Kathy was actually the state's first property tax administrator. Kathy and I, when she was in that capacity, we worked together closely on a lot of different issues over the years. And I always found Kathy to be very knowledgeable and understand the property tax system about as well as anybody in this state. So we're extremely excited to have her with us. After she was the property tax administrator, she's also the deputy tax commissioner, and then served for a few years as director of the Department of Economic Development and the commissioner of labor in this state. Today, she is part of a group that's called Accelerate Nebraska, which is working on education and career development in the state. So without further ado, Kathy, I'll turn it over to you. We are very pleased to have you with us tonight, and we'll let you talk, get back in your old property tax days and talk property valuations a little bit.
Great, Jay. Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone who's joined the webinar. Hope everybody's enjoying this beautiful Nebraska evening. I am honored to be here, Jay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to dust the cobwebs off of my brain regarding property valuation and the protest process. I do want to give credit and really encourage folks who are interested in filing protests to go to the Department of Revenue Division of Property Assessment website. There's an awful lot of information out there that can really be helpful to you as you're building and putting together your protest. I want to make it very clear that tonight my part of this presentation is going to be focused on the value side. I understand and can only imagine for a lot of agricultural landowners across the state that you have seen incredible valuation increases over the last about 6 to 7 years, and that has also created a corresponding increase to your property taxes. The value protest is very, very separate from the taxation issue, and so you've really got to separate that focus on value now, and the issues related to taxation can come at a different point in time. And Jay, I think you're going to talk a little bit about that, aren't you?
Yeah, we're going to finish up on that just a little bit after you're done talking valuation protests.
That'd be great. And then we do have a very short PowerPoint document that we've prepared for you. It's just got a few slides on it. And I think, thank you, Jay, for putting the first slide up. What I've done here is given the very basics of what a property valuation protest is, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the issue of value, since that really is the meat of what happens in a property valuation protest. But let's be very clear that your valuation protest needs to be filed on or before June 30. June 30 is next Tuesday. And if you're going to file it in person, you need to deliver it to the county clerk's office where the property is located on or before the close of business on the 30th. If you mail it, it must be postmarked as of June 30 in order for it to be deemed to be timely filed. Now, there is a property valuation form. It's called the Form 422. That is available on the Department of Revenue Division of Property Assessments website. County assessors, county clerks also have copies of these forms. But basically, the legal requirements of a protest are that you must state the reason for the protest. Why are you protesting the value of your property? You need to have a description of the property that's being protested. The document must be signed and dated, and as I said, it's got to be in the hands of the county clerk. If you're filing in person, it's got to be in their hands on the 30th, or if it's going to be mailed, it needs to be postmarked. And as you look at that form, and there's an area where you can describe why you are protesting the value, and usually when it comes to real property, which is probably what we're most interested in today, there's two issues that really come into play. One is that the value is incorrect, that the value is too high. Very few people protest the value too low, but sometimes it does happen. Most of the time people are protesting that the value is too high. And then second, whether or not you believe that your property is equalized or proportionately valued with other property of like kind. And so the two issues are going to be value and equalization. And Jay, you could go to the next slide if you'd like. So when you're looking at the value issue, and I will tell you in the years that I worked on property valuation issues, one of the things that is absolutely clear in Nebraska, and it has been our case law for more than 100 years, is that we have a value system that is based on the actual value of the property. And all of the case law going back 100 years related to actual value uses the term actual or market value synonymously. And so the question that is asked in terms of the protest of your value, and this is related now, I'm going to focus on ag land in particular, is the assessed value of your agricultural land at or near 75% of its actual or market value? And how do you then prove what the market value of your property is? And primarily what you'll be looking at is sales or other transactions in the ordinary course of business that help to indicate what the value is. And so for our state, we have used for all of its history of value is the sales of like property or similar property. Now, those sales can be from your county specifically in and around where your property is located, and it can also be in areas beyond your county into neighboring counties. As we know, agricultural land changes as it goes across our state, and what might be happening in one part of the county can be very different in terms of other areas of the county, either in terms of the type of land, the use of the land, or the market value of the land. And so sometimes you may not have enough sales near you in your county, but you can ask for this information from your county assessor or from the Division of Property Assessment. You can ask for sales from neighboring counties. Other things that can help indicate value is, for example, one is whether or not you might have a recent appraisal of your own property, and you can use that to help support the valuation of what you believe the valuation of your property is. So generally speaking, that's the issue of value. And for agricultural land, at or near 75% of its actual value. Equalization is another issue related to value, and that has to do with whether or not you believe that your property is at the same level of value, being assessed at the same level of value as other property. If it's not, you can bring an equalization issue into your protest. One example of that, and this is from years ago, Jay, you might actually remember this, one of our counties had a very different agricultural land value from south to north. The northern part of the county had most of the sales, and the sales were really the very active market. And in the southern part of the county, a very different kind of land and a very different kind of market. But the county at that time, many years ago, was valuing all the ag land at, if it was 3G, all the 3G was at the same value. If it was dry land and it was the 3D land, it was all at the same value. So no matter where you were in the county, if you had 3D land, it was all at the same value. So one of the things that came up in that county was the individuals who had land in the southern part of the county felt that they were overvalued from an equalization perspective relative to the property in the north. And so that's what an equalization case could look like in a particular county. Now, the other thing that you want to look at, and it's much more objective than subjective, is the physical description of your property. You want to make sure that the county assessor has your property accurately described. So are there the right number of acres? Do they have the correct land use for the acres that you have? Soil and soil type help to determine the class of agricultural land that you have, whether it's the highest irrigated land at 1A1 all the way to the lowest class of grassland at 4G. Have they properly classified your soils into those categories? So for land purposes, you can look at that physical description. Many agricultural land parcels also contain the building site and the description of the building. Many have a home site and have the description of the home. You want to make sure that the physical description of your property is correct. You can get all of that information from the county assessor and review that, because another issue that you could raise in your protest is whether or not the property is accurately described, and it could be that physical description of your property could be impacting your value. Now, as you prepare prepare a case, the burden of proof will be on you as the protesting party to prove that the county assessor's value is incorrect. And so it is incumbent upon you to bring forward the sales information, to bring forward an appraisal, to bring forward the accurate description of your property, so that the county board can look at your evidence and the assessor's evidence and make a decision. If you fail to bring forward evidence, then they will rule in favor of the county assessor, because the burden of proof is on you to bring that information forward. The protest is filed with the county clerk, so even though the assessor is sending that valuation notice to you, remember that you are filing your protest with the county clerk. The county clerk is the person who will then schedule all of the hearings and the process with the county board. You may be notified by mail ultimately from the county when your protest will be heard. Some counties do use a referee process. Some counties do not. And so counties can vary that process of how they hear or hold and hear those protests within how they manage that process. Ultimately, the county board will make a decision on your protest, and the county clerk will mail that decision to you on or before August 2nd. In Douglas, Lancaster, and Sarpy County, that date is slightly different. They have until August 18th. Again, if you are not satisfied after that process, then you have the right to appeal that decision to the Tax Equalization and Review Commission after the county board's process. So generally speaking, that's in a nutshell the valuation protest process. The difficulty that has, and it's been a historical conversation about the value of agricultural land, is the concern and for ag landowners, the frustration of what the value of ag land is and the price that is paid for agricultural land. But our statutes are very clear. It is actual value. It is the selling price of agricultural land, and yet it is at 75% thereof, as opposed to the other classes of land that are required to be at 100% of value.
Kathy, we do have a question that came in, and
okay.
The question that they have is it fair to value a ranch headquarters that has 2 houses as 2 separate 1-acre improvements, even if they both are sitting on the same acre of ground?
And so this goes to the issue of what many assessors do as they're trying to divide up that parcel of land to set the value, is that they will put a home site value. And then I assume, Jay, from what you've just said, is that it's a 1-acre home site. It has two houses on 1 acre?
Yes, that's what I understand.
I guess what I'd be interested to know, and I would ask the assessor this question, is why they determined that there would be 2, if this is the case, and not having the document in front of us, we can't really dissect it, but if they've set 2 house or home site values, why have they done that?
Okay.
Especially if they are on a single acre. And have they done some slight variation? Because the next question I would ask is, if I have a 1-acre home site with 2 improvements on it, houses, I certainly need to be assessed on 1 acre with 2 improvements. What are you doing for a property where it's a 1-acre home site and only 1 improvement? What is the differential in the land value that you are assessing that other owner at versus mine? And I'd want to know the difference. I'd want to know from the assessor why they've chosen to do my home site that way.
Okay. Well, that's the only question I have at this point, but I will go ahead and put this out to anyone. If you do have a question, there are 2 ways to ask those questions. One, you can raise your hand. If you have a microphone on your computer, I can unmute that microphone and you can ask that question. Another way is in your control panel of your GoToWebinar meeting, there is a question box and you can type that question. I will see that question and can read it off. So if there's any other questions out there, we can take those at this time. I'm not seeing any at this point.
Well, and if anything comes up over the next 30 minutes or so, ask away.
Okay. I think with that, we'll go to the next slide. And Jay?
Yes. Right now, what we thought we'd do is shift gears a little bit from the valuation side of things and talk about how we arrive at your total property tax bill. And that, of course, relates to the setting of the levies and the budgets that the local government set. And one of the things that we often hear as we're working within the legislature and other realms to try to work on ways to reduce property taxes, sometimes we'll hear back that, well, the problem may not be that bad, or it can't be that bad because we're not seeing people show up at the hearings and talking about with local governments about the budgets and the spending. And so what we wanted to try to do tonight while we had the chance and had people on the line is talk a little bit about the spending side And the next step, whether or not you decide to protest your valuation, there are other things that you can do to try to reduce your property tax burden or keep a line on that or control your property tax burden. And right now is the prime time to do that. Local governments are setting their budgets right at this point in time and starting that process. In fact, I think I just saw here in Lincoln that the local natural resources district has either had a budget meeting that they were making public or a hearing. I saw something in the paper about it the other day. So your schools, your counties, your NRDs, the other local governments that have the authority to levy property taxes are in the process. They're starting those discussions on their budget. The final budgets are set on September 20th, so they're going to be working on them from now into September. And so the time is ripe and prime for people to start having that conversation with their locally elected officials about spending priorities and how that results into property taxes. So Jay, you can go to the next slide. We just wanted to real quick share with you some of the requirements that are on local governments in regards to the budget process, so you can have some information about the budgets that your local governments are setting. The local governments, and again, these are your schools, your counties, your NRDs, and others, are required to make a budget summary available to the public. And so it's easy. You could call up the district office, you could call up the county office and say you would like to see a summary of that budget. They are also required to have a public hearing on that budget, and they are supposed to publicly notice that or advertise that 5 days prior to the hearing. And as part of that information that they're to provide and advertise, it's supposed to include the proposed budget and what they're looking at in the way of spending. They are also, at the same time, they are supposed to have a hearing that if there's going to be any change in the levy that they're going to levy from this coming budget year to last year or this current year, they have to have a hearing on that as well too. Oftentimes they will have these hearings, my understanding is concurrently, they'll have them the same evening or at the same time, but they are required to have a hearing on both. And so there are requirements already in law on local governments to try to make this process as public and as transparent as possible for someone that's paying attention and watching what's going on at the local level. Jay, you can go to the next slide. And so some things that you could do in this process that to help control your taxes or help on the local level to put some pressure on. First, as I already said, they're already starting here in June to have some of these discussions and talk about their next year's budget. So you can weigh in early on. If you know a local school board member, or if you know a county commissioner, give them a call, talk to them about it, ask questions about the process, explain to them your concerns about the property taxes. Secondly, get people to help, recruit others, reach out if you're active in your local Farm Bureau, reach out to some of your fellow Farm Bureau members and talk about some of the issues locally with the schools or the counties, and get others involved. And don't limit it to Farm Bureau members. Talk to neighbors, talk to friends and relatives, and try to get other people interested in what's going on. And then watch those public notices. As I talk, watch your paper and look at those public notices for those hearings and that budget process. Or you can contact your local government's office, again, the school district office, the county office, and find out what the process is, when they're going to be having those hearings, and so you're prepared and you know. When those hearings take place, don't be afraid to show up. You don't have to say anything. Just showing up and having several people show up at the hearing, I think will send a message to those local government officials that they need to watch the line on spending, and that the decisions they make on spending reflect directly on your property taxes. Oftentimes we'll talk to local government officials and they'll have a budget hearing and no one shows up. So if you show up, that will be different and you will get noticed. And again, you don't necessarily have to talk. But if you choose you want to testify on it, If there's some particular spending that you don't agree with, you could point that out. But I think one of the keys that you could do is just talk about what's happened to your taxes over the last 5 years, and provide some real numbers and examples of what has happened to the taxes on your home, on your land, on your personal property, and share with those numbers. And some of the increases, you can go back. I have the last 5 years here. You could go back and look at what's happened to your taxes over the last 5 years, because ultimately what makes your taxes go up is that local spending, because they have the power to drop that levy down to keep property taxes in line or keep the growth at a minimum. But ultimately it's the local budget decisions that drive what's ultimately collected at the local level. Jay, if you want to go to the next one. I wanted to end, I don't know if you can see this very well. It's a little small on my iPad for my eyes, but what I wanted to share with you, this is a map of obviously the state of Nebraska, and on this map it shows what the changes in property taxes levied in each county in the state on ag land, on residential properties, and on commercial properties. And we put this together during the legislative session and shared it with a few senators down in the body, and we just wanted to show what's happening on the property taxes that are paid on agriculture land relative to other property sectors in the state, and how things have gotten grossly, in our minds, grossly out of balance over the last few years. But so this shows, again, in each county, the actual property taxes paid. Kathy and I were visiting before we went live on the air about we're going to try to pull together some figures also what's occurred for valuation growth in the counties as well, and compare that with actual property taxes, because that would show you, give you an example or a differential of maybe how much of that valuation is being captured in spending and how much is not. And we're going to try to pull together some of those figures. But you can see in some of the areas, Douglas, Sarpy, and Washington County, folks with ag land in those areas are seeing increases upwards of 300% or bordering 300% in the high 200% over the last 10 years. Out in some of the other parts of the state, like Garden and Sheridan, it's a little more moderate, but they are seeing some increases there. So if nothing else, if you show up at a budget hearing, you could use some of this data if you wanted to share with your local officials on what's happened in your county on property taxes over the last 10 years, to give them a good idea of some of the pain that you're feeling with the property taxes and the increases that they've seen. And we would be happy, we as staff can easily gather some data on particular government entities, local entities, that we would be willing to share with folks if you want to look a little more closely at your school district or your county or your natural resources district. We would be happy to try to dig up that kind of information for you. Just shoot us an email or give us a call. We'd be glad to help. And so, Jay, that's it for my slides, okay. I believe, unless you threw a surprise one in there on me.
Nope. And we do have a lot of questions now at this point too. We also, I do want to point out that we do have 2 handouts that are included in tonight's webinar that you should be able to click in the control panel in the webinar. There should be a pane for handouts, and one of them is the map that is up on your screen right now, where you can download that and get a printed copy that will be a little better to read than what you're seeing on your screen. I did have a question of how you could get a copy of the map. Another thing to point out too is that the webinar this evening is being recorded, and that will be available tomorrow as well on our YouTube channel, and anyone that's on tonight will be getting an email tomorrow telling you how you can watch this, and anybody that registered but was not able to join us this evening will also get an email letting them know how they can watch the recording of that. But let's go to some of the questions we have. The first question is, can you ask the assessor to provide you with the basis for your property evaluation, the comparables that they use?
I'll go ahead and take that one. Yes, you can, and yes, they will have that information. For example, I'll give a residential example, but I believe that it will be applicable to the agricultural land class. If you go to the Lancaster County Assessor's website, I was doing this related to the valuation of my mother's home, is there will be times when the assessors will have information that shows the sales that they use to set the value of that particular parcel. So for her house, I went out and I could see the sales that they used for her value. The ag land is a little more complex, so I would be surprised if it would be available online the way residential is. But you can go to the assessor and ask for the sales that were used to set the value of agricultural land for this year, and it will be 3 years worth of sales. The most recent sale would in this case be June 30 of 2014, and then going 2 years back. And yet at the same time, for your protest purposes, you are not necessarily limited to that same time frame for bringing sales information forward. So you do have the ability to, if you had a current appraisal or current sales information that was newer than what the assessor had used, you have the ability to bring that to the protest process.
Okay, and the next question is, in Lancaster County, the Tax Equalization and Review Commission ordered ag land values to be raised 8% more than the county assessor values. Can this change be protested before the county board?
Not specifically only that change. The property valuation protest still needs to be related specifically to the value of your parcel related to actual value, and so you don't have the ability through your county board to protest only that percent change. I believe I'm correct on that.
Okay. The next question is, on average, year after year, total ag land sales in our county are less than 1%. How can the Department of Revenue and or the assessor get actual value based on that limited number of sales?
So I'm going to caveat my answer in this way. If only 1% of the ag land exchanges hands in any given year, then using 3 years worth of sales gives you about 3%. Statistically, a 3% sample is a statistically reliable sample. And in fact, for the other classes of property, the assessor will use only 2 years worth of sales. And in some cases, for residential and commercial, the percent can be as low, in terms of the number of transactions, the percent can be as low as it is for ag land.
Okay. Our next question is, what should you do if you have an appraisal by a certified appraiser which shows less than the assessed value if both the county and state board of equalization will not lower the valuation?
The case law indicates, and there have been cases that have talked about using appraisals in terms of defending the value that you're bringing forward to in your protest. And so you would bring that to the county board. I would cite the case that stands for the proposition that an appraisal is an indication of value, and so it should be given some weight in the protest. If you're not satisfied with what the county board does, if they don't take that under consideration or give it due consideration, or say they cannot consider it, which would be, that may be the answer that you get. I would cite that case, and then if you're still not satisfied, if the county board does not take action and consider that, and you're dissatisfied, then you would have to go to the Tax Equalization Review Commission. And if you're not satisfied with what the Tax Equalization Review Commission does with that information, you would need to appeal it beyond that. And that means going to the Nebraska Court of Appeals with your case.
Okay. The next question is, ag land values ran up very quickly, but have probably softened here recently. What is the likelihood of getting a valuation adjustment, and is there any way to know if assessors are using the most recent information for valuation and based upon the income approach as opposed to value?
So one of the things that in preparation for this conversation tonight that I was looking at is that there is a very detailed history available on the Department of Revenue Property Assessment Division website that shows the value over time, as I said, from 2004 to 2014. And I will tell you what you can see in this historic representation of value by class is basically what happened in the economy over the last 10 years. During the early period of time, 2004, 2005, ag land, residential, and commercial property was all tracking at about the same percent increase, 5, 8%. Then what you see start to happen in 2007, 2008, and beyond, especially for residential property, is the impact of the recession and what it did in terms of slowing valuation increase for residential property to almost zero. And even with that, there was still slight changes. They were very insignificant compared to what was happening for ag land, was continuing to escalate in value, continuing to go up at dramatic increases.
Okay.
And what will happen then if the market softens, and Jay and I talked about this as we were preparing for this, that he said that there are some areas of the state where you're starting to see ag land values not increase as much. What will happen is they'll just flatten out. Now they may go down, and that has happened in history. We have seen valuation decreases. Eventually the assessor's values will track with those. The question is whether or not the most current sales are indicating less value or flat value.
Okay, our next question is, how can neighboring counties have such a wide range of percent change in their property taxes levied? And is that an equalized protest worth pursuing? And are assessors following the statute in those situations?
So are we talking value or taxes on that question, though?
I believe this was probably going back to the slide that we had up earlier with the map. Let me go back to, I believe that this is going back to taxes.
Okay. Jay, I'm going to let you have that because it's a tax question.
I was afraid you'd say that. There's a couple of reasons that I could think of off the top of my head. One is those numbers that you see there are a reflection of the spending and taxing decisions of the local governments within those counties. And so I was just talking with the gentleman the other day that has some land in 2 different counties that's experienced this, where the school districts in one county or where he has land have tried to keep the line on spending, and they've dropped their levy as the valuations have grown. But across the border, a different school district and a different county, they have not done that. They've kept the levy up there and have used the extra dollars and gone into spending. So that's one reason, that the different spending decisions that are made at the local level. Secondly, to the extent that you have a little bit of different valuation differences or fluctuations across the county line, could be part of that as well too, even though they try to equalize those as best as they can. Obviously, sometimes you're going to have a little differences as you cross the county line in the valuation, and that could be part of the picture as well.
Okay. The next question we have here is, I can't find any sales of like ag properties in my county that have sold in the last 12 months. However, my valuations went up 42%. On the other hand, the university says that ag lands are down 5% in my part of the state. How can I prove that values have gone down if there are no comparable sales?
One, I would have a conversation with the county assessor to determine what caused my valuation to increase 40-some% from one year to the next, if in fact there were no sales. The other thing is depending on your area of the state, whether or not sales in surrounding counties are of like property, and were those sales borrowed and used to set the value in your county, which would not be illegitimate. It would be a legitimate use of sales information if the property is similar. So that's why I'd ask the assessor what was used to justify the 42% increase if in fact in the last 12 months there were no sales, assuming that last year the value was accurate based on the sales that were there. Now the other thing that can happen is, imagine that last year they had a 3-year base of sales and they set the value. You move 1 year forward, just assume no sales in this most recent year, but you're using now those 2 past years. Dropping off that oldest year, did that create an increase in value? Are they catching up with the market, is another way to say that. So I would have a conversation with the assessor to ask what created that 42% increase in this year's value over last year.
Okay. The next question we have is, how can I protest the valuation of land that is irrigated from a pond with no irrigation well supplying water, strictly runoff from rainfall? When the pond is full, I can irrigate maybe 2 circles approximately 3 inches before the pond is down. This definitely limits the yield, which is nowhere near land that has an irrigation well to supply the water whenever it's needed. Do I have a way to protest this valuation of this land, which does have a pivot but is extremely limited on the amount of water that's available?
And so what assessors are attempting to do is to classify your land based on your current use. So your current use is irrigation. The question that I guess I would ask the assessor and visit with them about, or raise in your protest, because obviously the 30th is fast approaching, and that is, yes, I'm irrigated, so I understand why I'm classed as irrigated, but do I have the same market value? Because remember, the basis of the valuation is that parcel's market value. It would sell as irrigated, it is irrigated, but it's different in terms of perhaps the sales of irrigated land that created value. For example, what if the sales that were used to create the irrigated land values for the county were of wells, pivots, what I would call traditional irrigated land. This parcel that you're describing is different. Would a willing buyer and willing seller negotiate a different price for this land because of what you've described as your limited irrigation potential? And this gets into the nuance of that value of whether or not the county board would be willing to say, this is a different kind of irrigation, this is a different kind restate that. This is a different kind of irrigation for this parcel, unique from other parcels, and yes, we believe that it would have an impact on its market value and would otherwise have be justified for an adjustment. I hope that makes sense.
Okay. Well, this question came up a day or 2 ago when I was visiting with a producer that was asking something similar, and that was just on gravity versus a pivot irrigated, to where he was claiming that a gravity irrigated, especially one that's maybe not perfectly level and has 4 or 5 different laterals going through it, does not have the same value if it were to come to auction as what it would if it were leveled perfectly, or if it had a center pivot irrigation system on it. And is that something assessors can look at then too when they're assessing those irrigated values?
What I would do, again, it's going to be the county board that we're talking about here that's going to make, if there's going to be an adjustment made at this point, it's going to be the county board that's going to make it. So the question is, what I would look at, and I think that in some counties this could actually be the case. There are sales of gravity irrigation, and then there's sales of well center pivot irrigation. Is there a differential at all represented in the market value? A lot of times county board members are irrigated, or are producers, are agricultural landowners. They understand those differences that can come to play in the market. And when you are protesting your value, you're protesting that parcel's value. You're not protesting all of the others. You're protesting this unique parcel and describing its unique characteristics. The question is, will those board members take that into consideration in terms of hearing your protest and making a decision about whether or not they would adjust your value for that?
Okay. Our next question is, do you have a case if the acres of farmland don't match with what the FSA maps are saying, i.e. waterways, waste ground, etc.?
I think that goes to the physical description issue. So I would take your FSA maps into the county assessor and show them your various land uses, your different that might be different from what they have, and then whether or not that would change the classification of any of your acres.
Okay. Next question: do county assessors?
Oh, and I'm sorry. Jay, let me back up.
Sure.
Again, you're taking this to the county board. I need to be clear about that. So yes, I would file a protest on it and show the difference in what the FSA maps are showing as your land uses. And yes, that is a protestable issue, to be clearer.
Okay. Okay, so the next question here is, do county assessors all follow the same statutes or just what's happening in their market area?
So the county assessors are all following the same rules of law. The statutes are all the same, the rules and regulations are all the same, the guidance provided by the Division of Property Assessment is the same to all assessors. The difference is, as we always hear in real estate situations, it's all about your location. And market value changes based on location. So ultimately, for that assessor, they are looking at what's going on with the market in their county, whether it's a residential market, a commercial market, or an agricultural market. They're looking at their market. If they don't have enough information from their own market, their county market, they can borrow sales from similarly located, similar types of property in other counties, but it is all about location. And so the nuance is that the assessor is using the sales in their location to set the value for that county.
Okay. Next question is, Kearney County had a hiccup this year and sent out faulty notices of value. The county sent out new notices, but giving us until a July 10th deadline, I'm assuming, to protest. Are there any consequences from this?
At this moment, I am not going to be able to answer that question. This is not the first time this has happened, and back in my long ago memory, I recall that this was an issue, and I have to tell you off the top of my head, I don't know the answer. And so I would direct that question to the Division of Property Assessment. Maybe, Jay, you could have a conversation with Ruth Sorensen and maybe get that answer out to your members.
Yep, I was just thinking that, Kathy. We'll try to follow up on that question and find out, and we'll maybe Jay Ferris. I don't know how best to post the answer, but get it back to the people in Kearney County.
Sure. Yeah, we will definitely. Well, it was Warren that asked that question, and so Warren, we will get that. I'll send you an email with the answer once we get that in the next day or two. But we will be on top of that for you. And if anybody else is interested, we can send out that as well. So next question that we have, wondering if we could share the formula to figure out the percent of assessed value increases. I'm not.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure if I do on this one either. Okay, so we'll go on to the next question, and this one is just wanting clarification on the map. So Jay, this one I'll send to you just so I understand this correctly. The example in Buffalo County that the tax levy has increased over the past 10 years. 226% for ag land, 73% increase in residential, and 80% in commercial. And that's what I'm seeing on that.
Yeah, that is correct. And just one technical correction, that is the actual property taxes collected or the actual property taxes levied over that time period. So it's not the levy itself has increased that much, it's the actual property taxes that were collected in Buffalo County. Those figures you shared, that is correct. And those numbers just came from the website of the Property Tax Division, and there's a wealth of information on that website for anybody that's interested. You can do a lot of digging and find a lot of interesting figures and facts and data. And so if anybody has some more interest in this, I'd encourage them to do that. They do a really great job on their website.
Okay. Okay, this question is going back to an earlier discussion. We have had that very same irrigated acre disagreement with the assessor. What options are available if the assessor won't follow county board's direction?
And so I'm going to make an assumption here, go out on a limb. So an issue was raised regarding this question about the irrigation. The county board ruled that the value should be adjusted, and then the assessor didn't follow that. That is certainly something that can be challenged. If the county board issues an order and it is not ultimately overturned or appealed and overturned, the county assessor is obligated by law to follow the order issued by the county board. So I want to make very certain that what we're talking about here is that the county board issued an order directing the assessor to change the value of a parcel, and if that valuation wasn't changed, then that would be challengeable by the property owner.
Okay. According to the person that asked the question, said yes, that is correct. That is what happened.
I would take it to the county attorney to have it reviewed.
Okay. Next question we have is, do county assessors take into account any easements of record, such as pipelines, power lines, etc., that may reduce the value of property when they set the value of that parcel?
It would depend on whether or not the easement has an impact on the use of the land. Buried pipeline, at least from my history, I'll caveat it with that, would not impact the valuation and the use of the agricultural land. Overhead lines and the footprint of the tower, there can be an adjustment made for the footprint of the tower because it takes the land out of productive use. And so it's not an, let's say it was an acre was carved out where that footprint existed, then that could be considered as an adjustment to value in terms of that particular parcel.
Okay. Next question, and this goes back to the question on the formula, and it was just basically, how do you figure the percent of assessed increase from 2014 to 2015 based on the current levy, compare year to year? How much has this increased? So I think it's going back to the map. So going more on a year-to-year percent increase, I believe, is what they're getting at.
So Jay, I'll go ahead and take it just because you've done the map, which is the cumulative percent change from 2004 to 2014. I happen to print off a spreadsheet that is also representative of that same information, and it does show the year-to-year change. And so there's two calculations that at least are done on this spreadsheet that I'm looking at. They show the annual percent of change. Let's say from 2013 to 14, ag land value statewide went up 29.43%. Cumulatively over the 10-year period of time, from 2004 to 2014, the cumulative percent change was 228% over that 10-year period. And then they've also calculated an annual change, which is basically divide that number by 10, or divide that number by 10, and you have a 12.63% change in ag land value every year of those 10 years. So it's just taking the dollar value change, dividing the current year into the prior year to determine the percent change in value.
Okay. We have another question, and this one I'm going to unmute microphone. Roger, your microphone is unmuted, so go ahead and you can ask your question. Not seeming to hear him, so I don't know if maybe his hand was raised by mistake or he doesn't have a microphone, but Roger, if you're still there and still have a question, please feel free to raise your hand again or type in your question. Okay, another question we have, and this is just basically, and I will go back, would you please be sure to give the website for viewing this webinar, and also thank you for putting this together. They found it very helpful. So, and absolutely, it will be tomorrow. We will get it out, get the recording of this webinar will be on our Nebraska Farm Bureau's YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and just type in Nebraska Farm Bureau, you will find this recording of this webinar. We will also be sending out an email to everyone that registered for the webinar this evening, and you should be able to click directly on a link inside that email to be able to view this webinar. And you can also share it with others as well too, with friends and neighbors. Anybody that has questions, please feel free to do that. So I do not see any other questions at this time, so I think that we're getting right at an hour for this webinar presentation. So Kathy or Jay, do you have any closing thoughts to share?
This is Jay. I'll go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you, Jay. Pleasure to work with you again. And to all of those that participated, thank you. It was great to be able to dust off the cobwebs of my brain. And you know, good luck with the protest. The ag land has experienced an incredible increase in value, and I can imagine the concern that many of you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I just wanted to express my appreciation for Kathy taking the time this evening to join us and dust off the cobwebs. You did a wonderful job, and I hope everyone's questions got answered. Please, if you have some further questions, or tomorrow if you're out and about and doing your work on your farm and ranch and you think of some more questions, give us a call, let us know, and if we can't find the answer, we'll chase it down for you. And we will do some digging on the Kearney County issue, and we'll get back to those folks there. So thanks everyone for participating tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yes, and I will echo what the others have said too. Thank you very much for participating in the webinar this evening. We hope that everyone did find it informative and valuable, and we also welcome your feedback. If there are any issues like this that we can help inform our members, we are looking for things to do like that, and also want your feedback. If you thought this was something that was worthwhile, or if you didn't think it was worthwhile, let us know that as well too. But again, Kathy, thank you, and Jay Rempe, thank you as well. So, and also again, please download the handouts, or if you need, we can certainly email those out as well tomorrow. So